What was your "it seemed like a good idea at the time" story? In high school, my friend discovered that he was particularly agile at running toward a wall and kicking off of it into a backflip. He would do this all day, every day, before school, at lunch, etc. One day we were inside a classroom, and the teacher had stepped out for a moment. Of course, he took this opportunity to try his little trick. He didn't, however, take into account the fact that drywall might not support his weight, as well as the brick and concrete walls he'd tried before. His leg ended up busting straight through the wall to the other side, into a classroom full of students taking an exam. So I wasn't actually in the class taking the exam, but to this day, I still imagine how strange and hilarious it would be to be sitting in that class, then suddenly see a leg burst through the wall. Makes me smile just thinking about it. I ran across the street with my eyes closed. When I was 14. I didn't get hit by a car. However, I ran into a tree headfirst and cut my face and knee open. For all of you asking what my thought process was, it is as follows. Who am I kidding? I have no idea what I was thinking. When I was a kid, I tried to ride my bike up the trunk of a tree so I could kick off and try to land it, and it'd be really cool. Turns out a tree trunk is rounded, and so you'll just slip off the trunk and hit your head on the tree. My brother still gives me shit about trying to ride my bike up a tree. Shooting each other with fireworks on New Year's. One landed directly in between my eyes. Luckily, it didn't go off and I wasn't injured. Holding onto my friend's car mirror while skateboarding on a newly paved parking lot. Me and my friend used to play a game where we threw a Swiss Army knife up in the air at nighttime and then ran away from it. With the knife part out. Being roommates with someone I had a huge crush on. It didn't end well. Playing sled dog with my newly rescued husky and a longboard on the hilly streets near my house in college. Snapped my right forearm in half and had to walk a mile back home to get a ride to the hospital. Moving in with my girlfriend. I fucked up, it's a disaster that I should have seen coming. Hey, you know those degenerates who you stay out drinking with until sunrise every other day? Why don't you live with them for the last 2 years of law school? That won't cause any issues at all. Cue 2 years of abuse to my body and liver, and more than a little strain between me and my friends at the time. Overall, it was fun, but definitely not a good idea. So back in the day, my brothers and I were shooting a bow and arrow behind our house. We had a proper backstop and a nice target on a bale of hay. After about an hour we were getting bored, and one of my brothers had a stroke of genius. Let fucking light one on fire. So there we are, wiring rags to arrows and soaking them in gas and shooting stuff. Didn't take long and half the yard was on fire. We'd shot pretty much every flammable thing we could burn in the yard. Since we were running short on stuff to shoot, my brother decided to launch one in a 45 degrees arc over the woods behind the house. We all watched, sore laughing and giggling. When it hit the apex was when it dawned on us that this was in fact a really stupid fucking idea. All 6 of us sprinted off into the woods in the direction it had been shot. Wasn't hard to find, it'd light an entire little meadow on fire. So we ran around stomping out fires for an hour. When we finally got the fire put out, we were sitting by the creek and my oldest brother looks at us all and says, "Dad never hears a word about this." Applying for a PhD position. Shitty pay and no free time in sight for the next 3 years. Thanks to it, I despise working in science like never before. When I was 15, my best friend and I just got new BB pistols. They were the Walther CP99. Looked identical to the real Walther CP9 with a removable magazine and no orange tip. We were playing with them in the back seat of his mom's car. They weren't loaded, we were just excited and wanted to take them out of the box. She knew we had them out and didn't think anything of it. This was the late 90s BTW. Before going back to his house, she went through the drive-thru at Burger King. You know where this is going. She's ordering food with 2 large 15-year-olds holding guns and pointing them at everything. Fast forward 30 minutes, we are pulling into their driveway, and his dad comes running out of the house yelling historically. One of his friends just called and said he heard on the police scanner that they were looking for his vehicle with 2 white males holding a female hostage at gunpoint. Few minutes later, several police cars pull in the driveway, jump out with guns out, making everyone get on the ground. It took some explaining on his dad's part about us being a bunch of dumbasses. 15-year-old me couldn't figure out what all the fuss was about, but 34-year-old me looks back and realizes that might be the dumbest thing I have ever done. I let my 14-year-old cousin at the time try driving the family car. I was like 18 back then or 20, and I told him it's easy to drive an automatic car, basically like driving a go-kart. Told him gas was right and brakes were center. I forgot to mention that changing the gear to D will automatically have the car move. We both panicked and hit a fucking tree in front of us at probably 1 mile per hour. Luckily we were in our neighborhood by a dead end. In 5th grade I invented a game where you get the swing as high and fast as you can, then at the bottom you run off it really fast. Mistimed it, landed on my head on asphalt, got a serious concussion. Edit: here's a carefully drawn and highly realistic depiction of what happened. https://i.imgur.com/uisj.jpg. So I was in Uganda with my family, and we see a large, about 5 feet tall, curled up leaf hanging about 8 feet off the ground. We're told that these leaves curl up and fall out the trees, and they're pretty heavy, so it can be dangerous to have it fall on you. My dad and I think, won't it be helpful of us to get this thing down? So, we're there whacking it with sticks, trying to get it down, to no avail, when my dad says, "Hey, climb up on that wall there, son, and jump. Grab it and then pull it down." Well, that sounds like a swell idea, Dad. So I do just that. I don't manage to get it all the way down, but as soon as I hit the ground, I get this burning sensation in my elbow. Turns out there's a hive of Ugandan mud wasps living in this specific leaf, and they do not take kindly to young men trying to tug their home down. So I'm just sprinting back to the office where the rest of my family is sheltered from the sun, and I practically have 2 elbows on one arm at this point while, as my dad described it later, an army of large black blots give chase. I make it back inside and my arm is numb, except for the searing pain in my elbow. Thankfully, there was no further reaction, the pain lasted only around 3 hours, and the swelling was down by the end of the day. That being said, it was the worst pain I've ever felt, even worse than the time I broke my arm into 3 pieces while arm wrestling. Starting a career in television in the late 90s. I mean, the internet is cool and all, but it's still way too slow to ever compete with 200 TV channels, right? I went on a solo trip to Costa Rica when I was 26. I'm a fairly petite female. I speak no Spanish. The Eco Lodge I was staying at helped me arrange a guide for an all-day hike. We were flown by 4-seater plane into the jungle, a 26-hour walk to the nearest town. We landed, Jose and I hopped out, and the plane took off again, leaving me, Jose and his machete alone for the day. Thankfully it went okay, but as soon as that plane took off I realized I had made a bad choice. Snow water skiing. Me driving the snowmobile across a snowy field and my little brother skiing behind holding a tow rope. 2 broken legs. I was in the area, so I stopped at my now ex-girlfriend's house to ask her to go to breakfast with me. Pulled up to see her at the front door and her neighbor walking out of her place while putting his shirt back on. She sees me and I just shook my head, waved and then left. Never spoke to her again. When I was a teenager, my brother, cousin, and a couple of friends decided to try to steal a Coke vending machine by tipping it over into the back of a Ford Ranger pickup and take off. We were like, shit, we'll just put it in our garage and have plenty of soda and we'll refill it. We had one of those keys for them. It was 2 in the morning and we're all wasted. This was mid-90s, mind you, and way out in the country. There was a little store with the machine. We backed up and my brother and I got it rocking back and forth and finally blam into the back of the truck. It lifted the front end of the truck off the ground, and as soon as it landed in the bed my buddy started hauling ass with me trying to jump into the bed with the vending machine, and my brother hopped on the back of the vending machine, riding it like a majestic horse. But we forgot to unplug it and for some reason it was just enough that it pulled the machine out the truck with my brother on it and crashed to the ground. We were young, dumb, and bored as hell. But it made perfect sense to me then. It was winter in New York. I was on my way to a party in the Lower East Side with my girlfriend. There was still plenty of snow on the ground from a recent storm. We were having dinner beforehand, and since the party was only a neighborhood away, we decided to walk the distance. Somewhere around Soho I notice a yellow cab letting out a passenger when the car behind it started laying on its horn. The cab was barely in the intersection, not really blocking traffic, and he was simply doing his job. But the car behind it just kept honking. Then they just held the horn down. So I bent down, made a snowball, and threw it at the noisy car. The horn immediately stopped. I shouted, "Shut the fuck up." Almost instantly, two men get out of the car and yell, "Hey! Come here!" To which I yelled back, "Why? What are you gonna do, call the cops?" To which they replied, "We are the cops." Oh, it was an unmarked cop car. I yelled back at them, "Oh, fuck off," as they walked towards me. We then had a very heated discussion about me having too much to drink and them acting like cunts. It ended with them telling me to go home and not to the party. Then I went to the party. Going on a 4-day bender with no sleep. Ended up getting the shit kicked out of me and required 7 stitches in the back of my head, spending 2 months' wages, losing my brand new £1,000 phone, and pissing off numerous ex-girlfriends by declaring my love for them. Oh, and I was hungover for about a week. Haven't had a drink for 3 months now because of my stupidity. I had just finished this bike ride with my scout troop and we ended it at the side of a river. So waiting for our parents to pick us up, the boys all go to a rope swing to fuck around in the river. It was absurdly shallow, the furthest swing would still land you in 3-foot water, average lazy swing was 2 feet deep or so. Mom comes, some dad hollers at me that she's arrived. I run back until I can see her getting out of the car and yell, "One more swing mom, I'll be right back." She seems in a good mood, says okay, starts chatting with other adults there. So not 2 minutes later I walk up to her with a broken arm. I had gone back for that one more swing, screwed up and planted my wrist into the shallow water, broke my arm, and got out of the water, saying bye without telling the kids what I'd done. Just sorta walked up to my mom, "Hey, I just broke my arm, sorry." She was not pleased. Like, seriously flick my bick, you had to go for one more swing, come on, let's go get a cast, you idiot. On a rainy day, I saw a hitchhiker near the university asking for a ride. He looked the part of a student. Although I never pick up hitchhikers, I felt sorry for him standing in the rain and gave him a lift. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. He told me where he was headed, so I went out of my way to drive him there. The guy just kept staring at me and said very little. When we arrived at his destination, he wouldn't get out of my car, no matter what. Finally, when a police officer came along, I told him to hop out or I'd call the cop over for help. That ended it. But if the officer hadn't come by, I have no idea what might have happened. Law school. Lol. Having sex with Sherry, she gave me crabs. Many years ago, I became absolutely smitten with a young woman. She was friendly, intelligent, funny, and almost painfully attractive, with a list of interests and hobbies that seemed like they were a near-perfect match to my own. Within hours of our first conversation, I had decided that the two of us belonged together, and as a result of that decision, I launched myself into a series of increasingly stupid attempts at seduction. There are any number of idiotic misadventures that I could describe here, but perhaps the most ridiculous of them happened on the evening before Valentine's Day. I had purchased my would-be paramour a small potted plant, something which I'd been told she'd appreciate more than flowers or chocolate, and I was intent on leaving it somewhere for her to discover rather than handing it to her in person. While any sane person would have just placed the gift on her welcome mat, I opted for a much less wise approach, convincing the girl's flatmate to give me access to their kitchen. My hope was that I could position the present in such a way that it would remain unnoticed until the next morning, at which point it would seem to magically appear in the morning light. Now, lest you think that I was a complete moron, I should mention that the young woman in question was supposed to be out of the house while I was making my clandestine delivery. Unfortunately for me, she had changed her schedule at the last minute, arriving back at home almost immediately after I had been let in. Her roommate and I exchanged hurried whispers as we discussed a place for me to hide, but since there were only a few seconds to spare, I had to settle for ducking down behind the counter that separated the kitchen from the living room. Had this been a scene in a romantic comedy, a slapstick series of mad dashes and near misses would have ensued. Sadly, real life doesn't work like that, and I was found almost immediately. The girl walked into the living room, asked her roommate who she had been talking to, then made a move to approach the kitchen, which I assumed based on what I could hear. Knowing that I was about to be caught, I huddled as far back into a corner as I could, then held the potted plant up in front of my face. Hi, Max," I heard the young woman say. "You can't see me," I replied. "I'm hiding." The good news is that my efforts, despite having thoroughly failed, were more or less appreciated. I semi-sheepishly presented the girl with her gift, wished her a happy Valentine's Day, then explained why I had been sneaking around in her apartment. She graciously accepted, but, quite reasonably, asked why I had tried such a convoluted way of giving her a present. All I could say was that it seemed like a good idea at the time. TLDR. I hid in a young woman's kitchen with a potted plant on the night before Valentine's Day. Star. Decided to get high and go to a yoga class because I thought I would get a better mind-muscle connection. Turns out the class I decided to go to was being taught by an Eastern European yoga psychopath and had me bending my body in ways I have never done before. Never again. At a bachelor's party last year, we rented a small house in a small town in the middle of nowhere. The second day we are there, we decide to go to a local state park which had a nice swimming hole. As we were getting ready to get out of the water, one of the locals mentioned a rope swing on the other side of the little island in the middle of the lake. Always being the adventurous person, I decide to swim out with a few of my friends to check it out. There are a couple of locals there and we watch them go first. It is a pretty high swing off a decent drop, and the water looks to get pretty deep, pretty quick. At this point I should mention that I am about 6'3" and 250 plus pounds at this point in my life. I should also mention that I have very little upper body strength. I've been a cyclist and runner most of my life and rarely worked out my upper body. I take the rope swing, go to one of the highest points I could, and launch off. As the swing hits the lowest point, my hands slip just a bit, but it's enough for me to react by dropping my knees just a bit. As this happens, my feet hit the ground. As that happens, my hands let go of the rope. My left knee smashes into the water's edge, which is much rockier than anticipated. My hands plunge into the water, which is also much rockier than I anticipated. I coast out into the water on my belly and float for a few seconds before regaining my composure and slowly swimming back into shore. My leg is bleeding and my right hand hurts like hell. We go to a local urgent care. Long story short, I ended up with 12 staples in my left knee to close the gash from the rocks. I had X-rays on my hand after the weekend and found out that I essentially shattered my right middle finger. I ended up needing surgery and now have 3 screws in that finger. It has most of its functionality, but it does hurt like hell from time to time. But damn if that rope swing didn't look like a good time. Dating my coworker even though I have been down this path once before. We lasted for a while before I caught him flirting with a new girl in front of me. I found out a lot of things after the fact and it nearly destroyed me. When I was working in retail for the first time, I was hired with 3 other people as seasonal employees for Black Friday and holiday season, and towards the end of the day, they would send us to go bring in any shopping carts buggies that were outside, and usually we would have to push it in ourselves because we didn't have one of those machines that would push it for you, and someone suggested why don't we just make one huge cart line and push it in instead of having 4 different lines, and everyone agreed so we get everything and lined up about 60 to 70 something carts. Took 3 of us to push it as it was so heavy. And the other guy guiding it at the front. We managed to get inside the store and into the cart area, but being a whole line and heavy as shit, we couldn't stop it in time, so it blew past the rail, and unfortunately on the other side of the cart area is where we kept the dishwashers, refrigerators, TVs that are supposed to be going out for delivery sold. We ended up breaking a TV and denting a fridge. Unfortunately, the store manager was doing his night rounds around the store and saw the whole thing as he was coming down the main hall. We got yelled at pretty bad and immediately just told us to go home and to see him in his office tomorrow morning. It seemed like a good idea though lol. In college, a large group of us hiked up to this abandoned mine shaft at night, took turns squeezing through a small crack in the mountain. The main entrance was closed off, walked down a long dark corridor with our flashlights, then set up a campfire in one of the large clearings at the end and proceeded to get wasted. All fun and games until a rather large girl got too drunk and couldn't walk on her own. Getting her out of there was a whole fucked up ordeal. Thought a few times during the process that we were going to have to leave her there in the dark and go get help, especially when my flashlight started to die. Fucking a shampoo bottle courtesy of our teenagers. Dating a girl that had a crush on me. Didn't know her all that well beforehand, other than that she was relatively quiet and an outsider at school. Relationship eventually ended because I wouldn't let her tie me up and put a knife to my throat during sex. Zero issues with the tying me up part, but the knife was a deal breaker. She did a presentation that compared some hentai shit to the Bible in our religious instruction class a few weeks after we broke up. The teacher actually let her show a few minutes of a hentai movie before intervening. I practiced my golf swing while standing on my bed. It was raining outside. I managed to take out 2 lights with the first swing, the bedside lamp and the overhead light. That one crashed down on my head. Broken glass everywhere. My 3DS had trouble reading the cartridges, so I put water in the game slot. I no longer have a 3DS. Getting taped to a cart, drunk, during a music festival. And then getting rolled down a hill towards a lake where a lot of people pee. Making bows and arrows with my friends when I was around 13. To ensure that the arrows got stuck in some tree or whatnot, we duct taped 80mm nails at their ends. Then we went shooting around the nearby field with complete disregard of others' positions. I did not take an arrow to the knee, but to the palm of my hand, remembering the friend saying to the other, "No worries, I won't hit him." Luckily nothing serious came from that. I stuck a googly eye up my nose when I was 3. It got stuck. My mom had to pull it out with tweezers. When asked why I did it, I wanted to see if it fit was my response. I still get the compulsive urge to put things in my nose to this day. Usually earbuds. No idea why. When I was younger I tried to show my sister that I could swing without holding on to the swing, so I did and I fell. We had 5 people who wanted to ride 2 quads at the same time, 2 people on each max. We ratchet strapped a fridge dolly on the back of one, making sure it was really tight secure, took the 5th person, ratchet strapped him in with bungee cords rope, and took off. It lasted 3 minutes tops, lost 2 straps, badly skinned up hand, from tipping over. Yeah, it seemed like a good idea. When I was 19 I joined the military. My friend and I got high one day after school, but my mom hadn't been grocery shopping and we had no snacks. So my friend and I coated raw Pillsbury croissant dough in cinnamon sugar and tried to eat it. Also concerning the munchies, my friend's parents had a huge box of Hot Pockets and one snow day we got stoned and I ate around 6 to 9 in one afternoon, which the human gut really isn't equipped to deal with. Every DE project repair I've attempted. I've told this story before, but when I was 16 I was going through this emo punk phase and I decided one day that I wanted to put colored streaks in my hair. So, I went to Walgreens and bought this semi-permanent red dye for dark hair because I had no idea how to bleach my hair. I get home, apply the dye and think I'm going to look so awesome that it'll be worth it if my parents get pissed. I had no idea what I was doing and instead of ending up with red streaks thought my hair I ended up with a huge red splotch at the top of my head because all dye clumped together or something. It looked terrible and was no longer worth getting in trouble for. The next morning I see my mom and she takes one look at my hair and bursts into laughter and tells me, "Wow, you really fucked that up, didn't you?" She wasn't mad, she thought it was hilarious, and after a bit of teasing she went to Walgreens and got me a box of black hair dye so I could cover it up and not have to go outside looking like that. When I was in 1st grade my 2 friends and I invented a game where we kicked our shoes off of the swings to see who could kick theirs the farthest. Somehow mine ended up on the roof and the janitor had to get it. And I only cried for like 20 minutes. I once poured wax down the sink because I was trying to make a wax waterfall, thinking that the wax would harden as it dropped down. My cousin and I were sitting on his balcony on a breezy day and we decided to spray some of my pepper spray into the air to see what it smelled like. Into the wind. Oh, how our eyes burned. There was alcohol involved. Summer camp one year, everyone was getting in barrels to roll down this giant hill. It seemed like tons of fun so I hopped in one and down I went. Well, the whole time it felt like I was being beaten up by the ground and I was bruised pretty much from head to toe with a few cuts and scrapes too. Being a young teen I of course had to act tough and like it was awesome, but it really was not awesome. I thought I was maybe just a wimp or did it wrong, but looking back it definitely seems it was a dare type thing everyone wanted to prove they were tough enough for. I'm guessing many more than just me had the thought of, well, that wasn't fun. For a film-like class, we needed to record a large variety of sounds with our sound recorders. I liked the sloshing sound of my water bottle and was curious how it would sound if it was flipped. To do this, I flipped the water bottle and tried to record the sound it made. Well, the bottle hit the ground, the cap came off, and water spilled everywhere. It got my notes wet, my shoes wet, my friend wet. I didn't know there was so much water in that bottle. I didn't even get a good sound out of it. Giving my virginity away. I was depressed. The man I was hoping to marry dumped me. Figured waiting didn't matter anymore. My little brother and I found a number 10 can full of matchbooks. We decided to light a couple matches for fun. Zach, my bother, got burnt and dropped a match, and it fell right in between two boards on our back deck. We kept lighting them and dropping them down under the deck until we smelled smoke. Then we filled my dad's dress shoes with water from the pool to put out the fire. Didn't work. We were 7 and 8 at the time. One summer same brother and I put up a two-man tent next to the pool. Brother and neighbor kid Andy decide to put the tent in the pool. They get in the tent and zip it up. No big deal, it's the shallow end. They then start jumping and bouncing the tent towards the deep end. Slowly bounce after bounce, the water level is rising in the tent that's still zipped up, and they are laughing and enjoying themselves like freaks. They make it to the deep end, and on that last bounce the tent sinks below the surface. It's now totally submerged and full of water, and they can barely break the surface jumping to breathe while still zipped into the tent. They go on swim flailing and gasping, while the weight of water-filled tent is pulling them under. I can't swim. I didn't know what to do besides scream my head off. Andy's dad heard me over his lawn mower and saved their asses. He pulled the tent to the shallow end and ripped the mesh window, freeing them. It was the summer of '97. I was 10, they were 9. My mom was sleeping. Okay, last one. My same brother was swinging a metal mop in circles close to the ground around himself, like he was a one-arm clock. He did this for over an hour. He got very sweaty, and the dish soap Palmolive he used as hair gel was running into his eyes, leaving him disoriented from spinning and blind from soap. He stayed laying in the yard silently until Andy's dad called my dad to come get Zach. He was maybe 10 at the time. While a friend and I were helping another friend move, we found some of her Zoloft that was who knows how old. She said, "Yeah, you can take it." We had no idea that washing down the pills with bourbon would be so incredibly horrible. The stomach pain and discomfort of that night was unforgettable. 15 years later we still refer to the night of the Zoloft when we want to compare something bad. In high school my friends and I were lost before GPS at night. We pull over to get our bearings and make a plan. I am the driver and decide to make a U-turn. There is a 5-foot-long median that I will need to go over. My friend Kevin, I call him that because of other stories, and I assess the curb from the car, and we are pretty confident that it is a low curb, but there were no streetlights. There are cars starting to come from the both directions, so I gun it to make the U-turn before it is too late. As we approach the curb we both realize the curb is not small. It isn't even medium. It's taller than most and isn't the nicely curved type, but the blocky type. But I am only about 10 feet away and closing when I noticed. I remember hearing Kevin say, "Oh no, it's big, it's big." So my instinct is to not stop, but increase my speed, hopefully the speed with force my car to pop over the curb. The curb was so tall it scraped the bottom of my bumper. The car did make up onto the median, but it felt like we hit it hard, and I think I heard the car say ouch. I get my wits about me and zoom out of there before the oncoming traffic gets to me. The car turned out okay, thanks to it being an old heavy Oldsmobile.